Have you ever felt like something was just meant to be? Like maybe you stumbling into somebody who turns out to be your soulmate, you know, and you guys spend the rest of your life together, and it was one of those things where if you were a second earlier, you wouldn't have ran into them. Or maybe, you know, you were about to leave for work and somebody asked for your attention and you had like a conversation for like 30 seconds, and then you leave for work and there's a car accident like right out ahead of you or right behind you or something, and you realize that if you were to have gone to work when you were going to, you would have been involved in that car accident. Or, you know, like something crazy, like you're like gonna jump off a bridge and your shirt gets caught and so you don't fall. One of those instances where you feel that it's no longer a coincidence, it's no longer a synchronicity that the result happened, that what happened, it points to something deeper. It points to something mysterious. You know that feeling I'm talking about where you feel like it was meant to be? I've definitely had those moments in my life with people, with situations, with tons of different things. I've felt it was meant to be. Now, when we say this, when we say it was meant to be, we kind of say it loosely. We kind of just throw it out there loosely, not really considering the depth of what it is that we're saying. Because one day I realized if one thing, just one thing is meant to be, that means the entire thing is meant to be. If one thing is meant to be, everything is meant to be. Because when you apply a little bit of reflection to it, you know, think about it. How can one thing be meant to be and everything else surrounding that up until that meant to be moment and after that meant to be moment is just accidents and chaos and you know what I'm saying? How could that be? How can one thing be meant to be? Because in order for that one thing that's meant to be to take place, everything needs to cooperate up until that point. Everything needs to align and happen in such a way where it puts you in that position for that meant to be moment. So yeah, one day I was just walking and I realized, holy shit, if one thing is meant to be, that means everything is meant to be. In today's video, we're going to be talking about one of the juiciest philosophical debates and topics of conversation, being essentially the debate between free will and determinism. You know, do we make choices or is it all determined? So, okay, obviously at first glance, it seems like we make choices. It seems like such an absurd thing to talk about. There's no free will. Because you think, yeah, hell yeah, there is. I make choices every single day, you know what I'm saying? But let's, first of all, note that this is an incredibly deep existential reflection on reality. So it's not absurd. You know, at first glance it may seem absurd, but when you apply thought, when you reflect on these things, you start to realize why it's such a huge topic of conversation amongst philosophers, amongst spiritual communities, amongst intellectuals and this kind of stuff. It's a huge topic of conversation and a huge philosophical debate for a reason. And it's because the idea of no free will and determinism holds a little bit more ground than you may have previously considered. So allow me, in my experience of this no free will and determinism and all this stuff, allow me to try to break it down as best as I can. So I want you to choose to make a fist. Do it right now. Take your hand while you're watching this video and choose. I'm going to choose to make a fist. So you just chose to make a fist. Fair enough. But now I'm going to tell you to choose to run through your neighborhood butt naked. Do it. It's the same thing. I can make a fist and I can run through my neighborhood butt naked. But all of a sudden, there's this, no, I can't do that. That's illegal, and I'd be so embarrassed, and I'd get in trouble. I'd lose my job, and I don't want to do that. You know, so I'm going to choose not to. You know what I'm saying? But the idea is that, let's say, you know, it's like, that's common sense, man. Why would I do that? Why would I run through my neighborhood butt naked? What if that common sense is a sort of preconceived mental notion that is limiting you from the free will that you think you have? Why can't you run through your neighborhood naked? Oh, well, I'd get in trouble and I don't want to and all this stuff. All these reasons start to come up. So, in that instance, it's a silly example, but nevertheless, in that instance, you can't really do that. You can't run through the neighborhood naked because of X, Y, and Z. And what I'm saying is, what if X, Y, and Z is a mental construction, a mental model that is limiting you, that's literally inhibiting you from being able to make that choice? You know? It's a silly example, but essentially what I'm saying is, it's easy to choose to make a fist and choose to open your fist and all this stuff, but when you start to get into a more complex area, like running through your neighborhood butt naked, you come up with all these reasons why you're going to choose not to. But in a way, if you look at it a certain way, those reasons why you're choosing not to are what are holding you back from being able to choose. So even if you thought to yourself, I'm going to exercise my free will by running through my neighborhood naked, you're not going to be able to because of the feelings of guilt and the feelings of shame and the fear of getting in trouble and all this stuff. So it's almost like we are equipped with preconceived desires and inhibitions and fears that limit us from being able to make these free choices that we think we're making. You know what I'm saying? It's a really far out idea. You say you can make all these choices, but if I tell you to go out and, shoplift, you're not gonna do it because of all these reasons. Now, what I'm saying is those reasons are not you choosing not to do it. They are a limitation based in your own psychology, which is limiting you from being able to make that choice. You ever heard of the example of how, like, you can't bite off your own pinky because your brain won't let you? That's kind of what I'm talking about, is we can choose to do this and choose to do that, but when it comes to something more intense, more heavy, something where we're trying to exercise our free will, we find ourselves in a position where we're not able to do it. We're not able to go through with it. And we reason our way through it. But what if that reasoning as to why I'm going to choose not to is something we couldn't have avoided? Where that mental faculty of choosing not to do it, you kind of are subject to that. Now, that might be a silly example, and I hope at least some of you can wrap your head around what I'm saying, that if you have free will, you should be able to choose to do whatever the hell you want, but when it comes to certain things, you're going to choose not to. But the reason you're choosing not to is because of a psychological model that you don't have control over. You know, moral and reason and fear and all this kind of stuff. So you, through your conditioning in life, were raised and brought to a point in your life where you wouldn't do X, Y, or Z. It's not because you're choosing not to, it's because you literally can't. You know what I'm saying? So this physical universe, let's speak on a physical level for a moment. This physical universe is, according to science and according to physics, it's law. It's all unfolding law. It's all atoms and protons and neutrons and physics and laws of physics and all this stuff happening. You know, and the universe was born and exploded from the Big Bang and assembled itself, and you know the whole story. And then comes along life. Complex life, and then comes along human beings, and then comes along you in this moment watching this video right now. So, if where we came from was law, determined law, not chaos, but law, where when this happens, that happens, If we came out of this system that sort of has a built-in law to it, how are we going to suddenly come out and start making all these choices? You know? What if your choices are predetermined based off of everything you've been through in your life? You know, what brought you to that point, your personality type, you know, how you're feeling in that moment. When you have the thought, I'm going to choose to make a fist, the reason you had that thought is because what you thought prior to it. And the reason you had that thought prior to the I'm going to make a fist thought is because of your entire life preceding that thought. It seems like you're making choices. It feels in the moment like you're making choices, but the idea of no free will and determinism is that it's just that. It appears as though I'm making choices and you're making choices, but what's going on is unfolding law, physics, psychology. You know, think about for a moment flow states. Think about when you're in the flow, when you're surfing, or for instance, me making videos sometimes, or when you're writing, or like I remember when I used to work at a restaurant, I would just get in this flow where like I'm just moving and dancing and everything is liquid and I'm not even present. I'm not even thinking about cooking and pulling tickets and calling stuff out and plating stuff. It's just all happening. I'm not choosing anything, but all this stuff is being done. Or driving a car, for instance, you know, living on autopilot, things you do out of habit, things you do automatically. You're not present in those moments choosing to do everything, yet it's still happening. And were you to put your attention on it, were you to put your ego identity on the driving or on the cooking or on the writing or on the making of the video or whatever it is that you find yourself in a flow state in, it would feel like you're choosing to turn and then you're choosing to pull the ticket and choosing to call this out and I'm going to choose to write these words. But there is a way of being where that choice is completely absent, yet the action, the activity is still happening. The activity is happening free of someone choosing to do everything. So what this brings into consideration is that choice is only apparent when it's in our attention, when it's in our awareness. Choice is only a thing when we're sort of insisting that it exists. I'm going to choose to make a fist. I'm going to stand. How often do you choose to get up in the morning and do your morning routine? Or does it more so feel like it's just kind of happening? You know what I'm saying? We're not choosing to do all this stuff. And it's only in the context of like a free will debate where we say, no, we choose. See, I can choose to close my hand and I can choose to drop this pencil and all this stuff. But we live such a huge majority of our life in this sort of automatic mode where we're not attentive to the things that were we attentive to them, they would be choices. But yet they're still happening. Can you see what I'm saying here? Can you see how life happens whether or not you're choosing to do it or not, whether or not you're making choices, you know? And there's a word called karma, which I'm sure you're well aware of, and it's not this revenge-seeking God that is mean to people who were mean to you. That's not karma. Karma means action, and this dimension that we're in, this world, this reality, this 3D world, is karma, is action. You can't, and what it means is you can't not do something. Stuff is going to happen. You know, you say, I'm not going to do anything, so you sit down. That's what you're doing. You're just sitting down. You know what I'm saying? So karma is inescapable. Things are going to happen. You know, you're going to drive your car. You're going to cook. You're going to write. You're going to get up. You're going to do your morning routine. But whether or not you think you're doing it is what's up for interpretation, what's up for consideration. You can either be the one cooking or be the driver or be I am the writer, or you can get into the flow state where the I, that is the doer, disappears, yet the activity is still happening. And the whole idea of how our activities are more precise and more in line and more fruitful and more pure and clean when that identity is not present, that's a whole other conversation about how it's the ego that gets in the way and muddles and interferes with the natural happening. And interestingly enough, it's the ego that thinks it's the one that is the doer, the one that makes choices. Even though choices happen free of a chooser every single day. You know? You do so much stuff. Once you start to realize it, it'll blow your mind. You do so much stuff where you didn't choose to do it. So who did it? Maybe it's the law that I was talking about. Maybe it's the psychological impulses and desires and inhibitions and personality and the way your upbringing and everything that led up to you inevitably doing that thing you were going to do, which if you were attentive to it, you would have said, I chose to do this. I chose not to do that. But if you could see far back enough, you would be able to see how you were going to do that regardless. You know what I'm saying? So, this idea of no free will, we call it in Western culture determinism, and that sounds very strict and sophisticated and all this kind of stuff. But no free will, there not being a chooser, has profoundly deep roots in Eastern mysticism, specifically that of Hinduism and Taoism. In Hinduism, it's called non-doership. In Taoism, it's called wu-wei, non-doing, inaction. In the Tao Te Ching, which is basically created by Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, he says, nothing is done, yet nothing is left undone. And what he's saying is, the idea of something being done implies the doer. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make a fist. When nothing is done, what he's saying is there is no doer doing everything. Reality, the Tao, does itself. So although nothing is done by the individual doer, everything still happens. Even though you are not being the driver of the car is still being driven. In Hinduism, one of the greatest mystical texts of that religion is the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna and Krishna and all this story that I'm not going to really get into details with right now, but essentially, Krishna is teaching Arjuna. Arjuna is somebody who's veiled from knowing who he really is. Krishna, as you may have heard before, is God, a form of the Supreme, of Brahman, the Almighty Self. And what Krishna is instructing Arjuna is that, hey man, you are not the doer. Stop thinking that you're the one making choices and lay it all on me. Lay it all on God. What Krishna is saying is, hey Arjuna, realize that God does everything. And you know how earlier I was talking about how law, the physical law of the universe, is why you're going to choose to do this. God, in Hinduism, is why everything is happening the way it is. The way I've heard it equated is that, we as the individual isolated little island of self, our ego, where I'm me and that's the big old world out there, what we think we're making choices. I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do that with my life and then I'm going to go there and then I'm going to do that and I'm not going to do that and I'm making all these choices. What it's kind of akin to is we're in the passenger seat of the car of life. God is driving. And we're in the passenger seat with this little plastic toy steering wheel. And we're kind of glancing over. And when God turns that way, we kind of turn that way with our plastic steering wheel, mimicking him, where it gives the impression that I'm driving. even though God is driving the car. And see, that's a distant recognition. That's a distant knowing. Now, if you're following the thread of what I'm talking about here, you've probably yourself touched into this place where you realize reality kind of has, like, it's holding itself up. You're not doing anything. You're being done. You, whatever this you is, came out of reality itself. It is reality. It's not even out of reality. Your identity, your feeling of being separate, is a product of a natural law of the physical, psychological, and spiritual universe. So it's all perfect. It's all in line. It's all in accordance and in harmony with the natural way of things. The perspective of God is kind of the perspective, or let's just say the perspective of the law of the universe looks down at you, your little ego identity, which thinks it's the doer and thinks it's making choices, and it goes, and then he's going to think he's choosing that, and then he's going to do that, and then he's going to choose not to do that. It's all law. It's all unfolding. It's destiny, you know? So the idea in the spiritual scriptures of this is that God does everything. It's all God. You thinking you're choosing is a part of God, but he planned for that. He laid it all out. He, it, she, whatever the hell you want to call it, laid it all out. You feeling like I'm going to choose to make a fist is God's creation, God's choice. Now, the idea of tuning into this non-doership is the idea of realizing that you are not in charge of reality. You are reality itself, and reality is doing itself free of your choice, free of your influence. You are one with God, with the law of the universe. And humans have created this distorted, problematic thing called ego, where it is the doer. I am the doer, and so I'm going to create my reality, and I am the victim of all of this stuff, and I'm going to get all the power in the world. And the doer is why we're suffering, according to the scriptures of spiritual determinism, if you will. The doer is why it's all a problem. So what they're pointing us back to is to realize that it's all reality, it always has been, and we're not separate from that. It's all happening naturally. What it's pointing us back to is to relax, to chill out, to sort of merge back into the ocean. You know? We're like a drop of the ocean, and we think we're separate from the ocean of reality. What we need to do, or in talking in the sense of Hinduism and Taoism and these kinds of things, is merge back into the ocean. Because we were never separate from it. But we've perceived ourselves to be separate from it, and so think we are subject to it, and therefore think we're making choices amidst it. But it's, you know, according to these teachings, that's not the way it is. The way it is that there is this illusion of choice, of doership. You know what I'm saying? And I'll tell you right now, I have experienced directly the place in myself or reality where I am not choosing. You know? I'm not picking all these words that I'm saying right now, just for example. I'm not picking the hand gestures that are taking place. It's all happening. I've experienced the selfless non-doership of reality. Through meditation, through psychedelics, just working, living my life, and I realized, oh shit, I'm not doing all of this. It's all just happening. It's all just a happening. You know? So in my personal, subjective experience, non-doership, or determinism, or destiny, or fate, or no free will, is a reality for me. But this brings into question how the idea of no free will and this kind of stuff, and the reason I don't really talk about it that much is not because I'm afraid to talk about it, not because, you know what I'm saying? The reason I don't talk about it is because it's impractical. It's the kind of thing where it's so far out that we don't know what to do with it. It doesn't benefit us. It's not practical. We don't know what to do with such a realization that God does everything and it's all a determined unfolding. You know, a lot of people will lose their ground and you know, like one person I've talked to about this says, well, if there's no free will, that means I'm not responsible. No, that's not true. That's not true. Just because you see into the nature of how there is no choice doesn't mean you lose your morals. Doesn't mean you make bad choices. The feeling of being the doer is present. It's persistent. So just because you imagine there's no free will, that doesn't mean you're going to do bad things. That doesn't mean you're not held accountable for what you do. So the idea is that we start to get weird when we imagine and comprehend the idea of no free will. So the reason I don't talk about it is because it's kind of this in the background thing where we don't know how to apply it. It's not applicable. I mean, it is, but a lot of us aren't ready to apply it in the way that it's meant to be applied. It's meant to merge with God, merge with reality. Not to become a nihilist, not to depress you, not to become cynical, not to go out and do bad things because you're not responsible because you don't make any choices and you couldn't have not made that choice. That's the mind obscuring the teaching. So the idea is that non-doership, no free will, determinism, it's impractical in a way. So you don't really need to worry about it. You don't need to worry whether or not you make choices or not. Because the feeling of being the doer is there, so carry on with your life. But for deep spiritual seekers, the experience of non-doership, of determinism, of destiny, becomes a perceivable reality. But even in them, even in those who witness the non-doership of reality, might not know what to do with it, myself included. So it's, in a way, impractical. It doesn't urge you to do something. There's not something to do about it. It's like a meta-realization. You know what I'm saying? It's like a video game character realizing it's a video game character. It's still going to go through the motions of being a video game character, but now it knows it's a video game character. And that realization, although profound, doesn't change the contents of the game. That's the very same thing with realizing fate and destiny and that you don't make choices, is that it doesn't change the fact that you feel like you're making choices. You know? So the idea of like the impractical nature, it reminds me of, you know, Ram Dass asked his guru, Maharaji, he said, are karma and destiny the same thing? Aren't they the same thing? Karma meaning doing, being like choosing, and destiny meaning you're not choosing. He said, aren't they the same thing? And Maharaji, his guru, said in such a funny way, he said, I'm not allowed to talk about that in public. And it's so funny, like if you have a relationship with Ram Dass and Maharaji, like you get the vibe of that. But what I get from that is that it's like, I'm not supposed to admit that you don't make choices. Maharaji's saying, I can't let these people know that they don't make choices. I need to let them keep thinking they make choices. You know? And that reminds me of another story of Krishna Das and Siddhi Ma, two other devotees of Ram Dass's guru, Maharaji. Krishna Das asked Siddhi Ma, he said, do we make choices or is it all God's grace? You know? Do we make choices or is it all determined? Siddhi Ma said, it's all God's grace, but we have to act like we make choices. So what do you do with that? You know, the idea is to not spiritually bypass your feeling of being the doer with this intellectualization of, no, I am not the doer and it's all being done by God, so I'm going to go be sloppy and be a bad person and stop working on myself and be arrogant because I am not the doer. Siddhi Ma is saying, although it's all the grace of God, although it is all destiny, we need to live with where we are, which is in feeling as though we are the doer. And that's what I'm telling you, too, about the impractical nature of determinism, of no free will, is that you don't really do anything with it. I mean, and also, if you think I'm nuts, if you think this is crazy, I highly recommend you to go into the comments and tell me why I'm wrong and tell me why there are choices or why, whatever, your side of the story, because this is like the juiciest debate thing, and I would love to see your opinion on this matter, because I live in both boats. I am aware of the duality of the two, of I make choices, but also I don't make choices. You know, can you live with that polarity? Can you live with that paradox, where I choose to make a fist, and I feel that energy of being the chooser, but also, simultaneously, I didn't choose to do that. It just happened. It happens free of self. It's completely intertwined with the way of reality. You know? So if you can get down with that recognition, that yes, you are the doer, but at the same time you're not the doer, that is the edge, the knife's edge that I'm talking about. Where it's all happening naturally, but also you're making choices. So do the right thing. Choose the right thing. Keep making those choices. Because whether you are aware of no free will or not, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference in how you're going to respond to it. You're either going to get all freaked out and believe it or not believe it, or think, yeah, that's very far out. That's a very interesting concept. It doesn't make a difference. And that's what I'm saying about the impractical nature of it, where it doesn't serve in any way. That's why I don't talk about it that much. So this begs the question, what's the point of feeling like we're the doer? If it's all determined and there's no free will and we don't make choices, why do we feel like we're making choices? And in my opinion, I mean, I don't know. First of all, I don't know. I'm in the same boat as you, bro. But the idea that I've come to in why we feel like we're making choices is to evolve. It's to learn. It's to experience reality. It's to grow, to individually grow, where you learn lessons and you acquire skills and you live your life in particular ways and you go through certain experiences. Because if you didn't have this feeling of being the doer, there really wouldn't be a subjective sense of self. The self is the doer, you know? So the idea of there being the doer is for there to be an individual ego that feels like it's experiencing reality. You know what I'm saying? And it's to learn, it's to grow, it's to interact with other individuals and make choices and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, even though it's all determined and it's all this play of God. It's all this play of reality. You know what I'm saying? It's far out stuff. And if you're thinking, what the hell's the point of all of this nonsense? That's what I'm talking about. It's not really practical. It's like a meta realization that us doers, us individual egos, don't know how to comprehend. You know? I gotta go, but I want to share with you a story real quick. Another sort of miracle story. Ram Dass was in India, and he was on this bus, and he was riding around with a bunch of his friends, and they were going around sightseeing and all this stuff. And they were going to be going to this one place, but on the way there was this Hindu festival going on. So one of the guys asked Ram Dass, like, yo, can we go to this festival? And Ram Dass thought about it for a moment. And at first he was like, nah, I don't want to go. Let's go to where we were planning to go. And then after thinking about it, he's like, who am I to tell these people what to do? So he went up and he told the bus driver, yo, take a left and go to this festival. So as they're driving, as they take the left and they're going to the festival, and on the side of the road, walking down the side of the road, they see their guru, Maharaji, whom they hadn't seen in months. So the bus stops and they all get out and they're ecstatic and crying and just blissed out to be with their guru. And the guru says, "Come with me, follow us." So they all follow Maharaji and they go up this road off into the woods and up to this little house. And they go into the house and there's a meal prepared, cooked, hot and ready for every single one of the people that were on the bus, including the bus driver. There were 33 people on the bus. When they went to that house, there were 33 meals prepared. Maharaji, the guru, had told the women that lived at the house early in the morning, "Hey, 33 people are going to be arriving later today at this time. Make sure you have meals prepared for every single one of them." How did Maharaji know that? Now, Maharaji is a saint, a Hindu saint. Is it possible that Maharaji is tuned into a level of reality where he can see the determined nature and determined unfolding of it all? And the miracle of it is that he kind of slipped up in revealing that he knows what's going to happen. Ram Dass, in the moment, chose, "We're not going to go to the festival," and then said, you know what, I'm going to choose to go to the festival. But that was all determined because Maharaji knew they were going to be coming down there and had a meal prepared for every single one of them. So this is just one of many stories that point to this deeper, more mysterious undertone of reality that considers the idea that maybe there is destiny. And maybe the choices that you're making were meant to lead you in the direction that you were meant to go in your life. And were you to not feel like the doer, you wouldn't have made that choice. So maybe it's all pointing you exactly where you're meant to be in every given instance. Let me know in the comments what you think of this. This is a really heavy loaded idea to unpack, and I would be glad to hear your opinion on it. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and if you did, consider subscribing and leaving a like on this video so that this video can get recommended to more people like you, because it really helps. So with that said, thank you guys so much, and I will see you all later.